Overthinking is a symptom that you didn't think enough before. You weren't prepared enough. See this with pro athletes and athletes of all levels and high performers. It's like never worked on their mental game. But then all of a sudden, when you're in it and you've never done any plan to cope, and then you start facing it can be very hard to get yourself out.
Hey everybody, I'm Zal Mednick. Welcome to another episode of Preconceived. Thanks for following us. In this session, I interviewed Dr. Cassidy Preston, who is a mental performance coach, author, and keynote speaker. He coaches elite athletes, teams, and high performers to optimize their mindsets. This was a discussion really on just how you can perform your best. What do you do when you make a mistake and you start to question your confidence? What does an athlete do in that situation? If they fumble the football, for example, and they're on the sidelines, what do they tell themselves? How do they recover from that? How do you deal with the pressure when expectations are rising? And this is something that's applicable really to everybody in their everyday lives, not just to athletes or people who are deemed high performers, because we all struggle in our day-to-day lives with trying to perform and achieve the best that they can. I'm an ophthalmologist, which is an eye surgeon. That's my day job. So some of the conversation focused around that because I also run another podcast geared towards ophthalmologists. So we do talk about eye surgery, but I thought that that would be an interesting lens through which you could view this whole concept of high performance. And again, it's applicable really to anybody. But if you hear me kind of going into some of the nitty-gritty stuff about eye surgery, maybe you'll enjoy that. Maybe you'll find it a little bit gross. But hopefully that will give you a little bit of a window into what I do in my day job. And more importantly, hopefully this discussion with Cassidy Preston will give you a little bit of insight into your own lives on how you can be the best possible performer and do the best job you can at whatever it is you're doing in life. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, Dr. Cassidy Preston, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Zal. I'm excited to be here and dive in.
I'm very excited to have you, and this is kind of a different topic than the typical one we do on Blind Spot. Usually we're talking about, I guess in some regards, more boring things like clinical diagnoses and different surgical procedures and some of our blind spots there, but this episode is super important, I think, and it's about some of the blind spots maybe in some of our psychological processes and the way that we go about our work on a day-to-day basis. And obviously, we try to achieve high performance in everything we do, but sometimes that may not be something we necessarily unpack and think about. To start off, you're a high-performance coach. Talk to me a little bit about what you do, who you work with, and just to give a sense to people about who you are.
Yeah, so I'll work mostly with athletes. So I'll work with like professional athletes, NHL players, pro golfers, a variety of sports, as well as athletes trying to make it to the next levels and up and comers. And I have a whole team around me and that also works with a variety of ages and sports as well. However, obviously that quickly translates to working with business professionals or anybody dealing with pressure and adversity and have really high internal standards, because there's going to be noise, there's doubt, there's fears that come up, and it's having those processes within to process that, to deal with that, so that they can be focused and in the moment and perform at their best consistently. So that's kind of Cole's notes of who I work with, and then how we do it. I'm sure we're going to get a little bit more into that, but there's a wide range of understanding anybody dealing with pressure and adversities and having high standards. It comes with the mental game. It becomes so important for them.
Most people listening to that are probably saying, wow, that's a really, really cool job. And also thinking, wow, I could definitely kind of use some advice and hints. And I'm curious, and we'll get into this, kind of what you say to athletes, because I love sports, and I'm sure a lot of people love sports listening to this, and I often wonder when I'm seeing somebody, for me it's football, that's my favorite sport, and I'll watch somebody and I'll see them have a bad game, and I'm thinking, obviously they don't want to have a bad game, right? Nobody wants to have a bad game, and obviously they come out saying, I want to do better, and what do you say to that person? What would you say is one of your main tenets in the idea of mindset first? There's obviously a lot of psychology and a lot of principles that go into what you teach and what you preach, but what are some of the core tenets of what you think are most important for the athletes you deal with to achieve the best they can?
Yeah, there's probably a few different ways, and even like trying to use your example of like, what do they do after they have a performance with it? They're not happy with it, and a huge tenet of the mindset first approach is like it's an inside out approach, meaning the main mistake where people really start to get stuck in their own head, they're overthinking, they're fearful, they're worried that, they start holding themselves back, by their mindset and their mental approach. It's usually because foundationally they're going outside in, or what I'll call results first. The whole priority and everything revolves around like, well, what do I want to achieve? What's the results? What's good? Like, what's the outcome? And the outcome therefore dictates how they feel. And they go outside in, meaning, all right, well, here's the result. Here's what I got to do to get the result. And the last thing they'll focus on is like, well, now who do I want to be and how do I want to feel? But if they never go inside out and they're always going outside in, well, then they're like emotional roller coaster and they're so dependent on the external world. And that's not a great source of consistency, because there's going to be variability in the outside world and we want to stay steady. And that's why we want to go inside out. If you're a fan of sports, this is why sports is so entertaining. There is going to be these highs and lows, right? So like, and so it's like often with a pro athlete, I'm like, you can't think like a fan. Like fans are out there going, yay, and oh, like you're on the bench, like going on this emotional roller coaster. Like it's not conducive. So one of these main tenets is, all right, well, let's go inside out. Let's take a moment. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What are these traits? What does that look like, feel like for me? And then that leads to the actions. And then we actually go play in the outer world, right? You have to go actually get on the ice, do the work and show up and get after it. And it leads to the results. But we're flipping the priorities. We're flipping the approaches, and spending some time to go inside and get clarity first and foremost is a very powerful tool.
I love the way you phrase that, going inside out, and also just not going results first, because the reality is when most people are thinking about their performance, like the end product is the results, right? And if you
Yeah.
don't get the results, especially in sports or especially in surgery, like we'll talk about, that is going to be a problem. So
Yeah.
it's natural for people's minds to go to results, because if the results aren't there, then there's going to be a problem. You're going to get
Yeah.
benched, you're going to lose your job, or you're not going to be a
Yeah.
good surgeon. So I guess one question that maybe relates to results as opposed to mindset is something that's very common advice in life is just try your best, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times when I'm talking to someone, they'll say, listen, you're trying your best, you're doing your best. And I imagine that athletes, when they're having a bad day, it's probably a good thing to say, I tried my best, I am trying my best. How do you go into a situation where you want to have the mentality of, I'm going to try my best, but you also at the same time have the mentality of, I'm going to be able to succeed, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes the mentality of, I'm trying my best maybe supersedes that
Yeah.
I am going to achieve well, and you need to kind of coexist with both of those mentalities.
Yeah, well, I can look at it from a couple sides. Like if we look at the after the fact, it's like, hey, did you try your best? And it's like, yeah, but the result matters. I tried my best, but I didn't get the result. And trying to break down that like internal conflict of like, I'm trying my best, but I'm not getting the result. Well, we want to results are a form of feedback. It can be a great form of feedback. Okay, well, what can I do differently? How can I learn? And just because you're trying your best, well, what does that really mean? Trying your best at what? Right? And what we really like to get people to do is like setting standards for their preparation, for how they show up, for the parts of their game and their process. And it's like, hey, I gave my best. However, here's some things I can now work on or adjust. And sometimes you just give your best and you're fully prepared, and like life just happens. Like things aren't going to go their way. Like it's the other team's trying to win, or there's complications and surgeries. And so this idea of both things can matter. And it's just about the bottom line and just the results. Well, okay, well, like that's a pretty like, and again, you're going to get that results first emotional roller coaster versus, all right, well, who was I being? What was my standards and my process? And then let's learn from it and adjust standards. Maybe it's like, actually, I don't think I've had a high enough standard for rehearsing here or for this part of my game. So that's something now I can work on and evolve and learn. Now, on the flip side, the before side, which you're alluding to, is like, well, okay, well, I want the result and I want to get the result, but I want to be focused on doing my best, but I want the result and I want to be my best.
Exactly.
So like that side is kind of like, that can cause you to go a little loopy just trying to sort that out. So one of my favorite analogies for this is we want to be driven and detached. And so an easy way to think about it is like even like a golf, your grip in golf. So you don't want to squeeze it too hard. Yeah, you can't fully let it go either. And so we want to be really driven, which means we hold like we want the result and we really care about it. We want our athletes and high performers to really want it. Like it's like sometimes people are like, oh, you got to want it less. I'm like, that's weird advice. Why would you ever tell someone to want something less? Like as if that's the problem. No, we want to be able to want it yet, and at the same time be able to let go and understand the range and detach and be able to see it for what it is and zoom out. And so that's where we're moving in and out to find the sweet spot of the grip of like, now I'm going for what I want and I'm doing it in a calm, grounded way that I'm not dependent, forcing, trying to control it. And that's, again, a lot easier for us to say than to go and do, but it's definitely doable and it's a never ending pursuit. And having the awareness and the attention, then what does that look like in an individual? There's some nuance and personalized parts to it, but that's, from a high level, looking at deciphering on this side versus then after the fact, like it's like, oh, okay, well, how'd I do? And, you got to be able to process and we don't ignore the feedback. So, and you want to adjust and learn, and, be clear on what your standards are. Cause sometimes it's like, yeah, I didn't get the result and you know what? I'm not happy with how I prepared. So, or, the way I showed up in this area. So something to learn and grow and push yourself. So versus, well, I gave my best. Like, what? Like that's not a recipe for high performance. So, we don't want to make it all about the results. Cause then that, now you're going to hold on too tight and be too tense.
And you're right in that there's those are two separate moments. One is before it's going on, what's the mindset there? And then one is the mindset afterwards. And that's where it's a little bit makes more sense to say, I tried my best and I'm going to learn from it, but different than before you do it, where you don't want to go in with the mentality of just, I'm going to try my best. You also want to go in with the mentality of, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to win.
Yeah. I'm going for it.
There's a lot of actionables, I'm sure, that you go over with your clients, with athletes, whoever you're working with. And sometimes people will say, in terms of this idea, inside out or outside in, that you kind of have to change your mental processes. And that is then going to kind of guide behavior, maybe not in this particular context. And then some people would say, and maybe they're not different from each other, maybe they're not mutually exclusive, they would say, sometimes you got to kind of just get out of your mind completely. And you need to just focus on the actions, stop thinking at all. And once you kind of maybe practice enough, repeat things enough, that's going to lead to a change in your mindset. What's your thought process on the cause and effect there?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I'll answer in a few ways. One is, because I'm even just use the last question, there's the before and the after. We didn't really talk about the during. Like I didn't specifically say during. So like, what would I coach someone to do during? Well, it's just be in the moment. It's just to go and let it happen. We prepare, set our intentions, we rehearse, we go inside out before actually. So what? We could just be in the game, be in the moment, be on the actions. And so, whereas I don't really want somebody, especially an athlete, but in any high performer, overly like thinking and judging. It's a performance time. You're in the moment, adapting, executing the game plan. You're focusing on the task at hand, right? And versus like, well, I got to be thinking about like, oh my, like, like that's not helpful. And so sometimes we'll have someone come in and because it is helpful to prepare and set your intentions before and to be clear on who you want to be and know you want something and get detached. And so have this healthy, grounded preparation. And we do a lot of coping planning. Like, how are you going to respond if adversity happens? How are you going to respond if you feel the pressure or the fear or the different responses in your body? How will you adapt in the moment? Well, all that prep, then sets up and then it's like, all right, well, now you got to let go and just go let it happen. Trust yourself and adapt along the way. So that kind of starts to answer this middle part, which is obviously, super interesting and can unpack in a lot of ways. But to go loop back to the first part, sometimes we'll see this with pro athletes and athletes of all levels and high performers. It's like never worked on their mental game. Yet they never had a whole lot of mental game challenges and they're just like in it. But then all of a sudden, when you're in it and you've never done any plan to cope, and then you start facing, it can be very hard to get yourself out. So that's the challenge of like, well, I'm not gonna, if I start thinking about it, well, now I'm gonna think about it too much. Yeah, I get it. Like if you open Pandora's box, now you can't unopen it. Does that make sense? Once you've seen what's in there and you've thought about your mindset, we can't unsee it. But I would rather be prepared, and now you can adapt a lot better, right? And so, because a lot of the people come to us is like they've never opened it, and then all of a sudden they're like, I don't know what to do, like, and they're spiraling. Does that make sense? So it's there's this process of like, okay, well, I want to understand it, but it doesn't need to be complicated.
Yeah.
Right. We're not trying to get people to think a bunch. And it's like, okay, well, now I got to think about also the mental work I went on plus the actions it's like, what? Like, no, like we're doing the pre-work, right? Overthinking, a good way to look at it is overthinking is a symptom that you didn't think enough before. You weren't prepared enough. So now your brain's trying to like compensate and figure out a plan and like, well, what should I be like? No, like you didn't think enough before. If we think and plan to cope enough before, then as things come, we just adapt and adjust along the way.
And on some level, it's basic in that there's three phases, right? There's the before, there's the during, thereafter. On the other hand, probably most of us don't break it down like that. And I just already can see how that would be helpful to break it down.
Yeah.
I'm going to go into some ophthalmology specific questions and I canvassed some people's opinions and thoughts and questions they had before doing this episode. I obviously know some of my own, I don't want to call them demons and be dramatic, but related to operating. But I spoke to people and got some of their questions. And one was related to new grads, people who were coming out, they've done their ophthalmology residency or any surgical training residency really. And the reality is we know based on studies that there's going to be higher complication rates in people who are starting out by themselves after doing their training, right? And they're on their own now. And how would you coach people to prepare for a higher complication rate? And again, that's not saying go into it thinking you're going to have complications, but cataract surgery is our bread and butter surgery in ophthalmology. A lot of us do other procedures as well, but we'll focus on cataract surgery. And in cataract surgery, you're going to get complications. And one of the complications I'll explain to you briefly is called a PCR, a posterior capsular rupture, where basically the cataract, think about it as a Smartie. This is what I tell patients. We make a little opening in the Smartie. We take out all the chocolate, which is the lens. We keep the shell, and then we put a new lens inside the shell, which is called the capsule. Sometimes, though, the shell can break and there can be a little tear at the back of that shell, and that's what we call a PCR. And that's not good. Sometimes when that happens, we can manage it so that it doesn't cause a bad outcome. And sometimes we can't, and it does cause a bad outcome, and the chocolate, the lens, falls into the back of the eye. That's kind of the basic way of saying PCR. Knowing you're going to have maybe more of those, how would you coach somebody who's starting off and saying, you know what, I'm stressed and I think my confidence is going to be shaken, or my confidence is shaken because I've had a few of those?
Yeah. So I'll go into the going in part again, where it's like, hey, I'm worried I might get some, right? So whether they've had some recently or not, or they just know they're young, like, I don't want to get some. And well, a big part of that is acceptance. And so, which is a huge thing we do with athletes all the time. Is like, well, you can accept you might not score in the next game. I was like, well, maybe you shouldn't play. Like, it's like maybe hockey's not for you. Like, there's this range of results, and be able to own and accept. It doesn't mean tolerate. It's just owning the situation. It's letting go of the range, so now you can just go do the work. And I remember as one of the first surgeons I told this to, I don't think he was an optometrist, but I think he was more radiology, or I forget the exact type of, there was lots of complications. So, and he came up with this thing. I was like, oh yeah, well, except that you might not get, and I was like, well, this is a little bit different, especially with him. There's like the life and death of his, I was like, I don't want you to be indifferent to the life or death of your patients. I don't want, the surgeon here to be indifferent to the success and failure of the surgery. You want the result that you want, and you don't want this one. However, there's a range of results. And if you can't accept that, don't be a surgeon. Don't do the work. Like it's the burden of being a doctor and a surgeon. And now, again, you're going to do everything in your power to reduce that and learn from it. And when they do happen, there can be great learning moments and unpacking. And it's obviously just part of the process. I mean, you're doing difficult surgeries and you're learning, like there's going to be mistakes. And so there's that side of it. And a big side of it too is like collapsing the fantasy nightmare we do a lot with clients. So the fantasy is like, well, I'm going to be perfect and the best surgeon ever, and everything's just going to be great all the time. Like it's no, there's, let's just say you start your career, I don't know, you're like 100 for 100. It's like, well, guess what? There's a lot of pressure and expectations now to come with that. Like it's not all sunshine and rainbows, playing in the HL, being, the best surgeon of all. Like there's challenges that come with that, and vice versa. Like, oh, well, when you do face adversity or you get cut or things don't work out as an athlete or a high performer, well, they can be great sources of grit, growth, learning, defining moments that can really fuel you and help you grow. So it's just it's a result based on the work I come in, my ability to be present, and then as well as like the circumstances of the environment, the obviously the patient and their health, and like I'm sure that, like stuff I don't know, but I'm sure there's things out of your control that influence it.
That acceptance piece is big, and I mean that obviously goes on throughout your whole career, and that you got to accept it. But I guess as you're starting out, accepting it's going to happen a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, well, if it does, or when it does, like those are my learning opportunities. It is what is part of the journey. Like, and versus if you try to fight it, resist it, and control it, like now you're going to be more tense. You're thinking about the outcome in the middle of this. Like you're not in the moment, focusing on the task at hand and process, which will actually increase your probability of making, a mistake. And so there's that side. And then the other side, like with the confidence and the after the fact is, we do this with athletes a lot, but it's like, instead of the word confidence, we'll use the word capabilities. So like what confidence is just somebody that owns their capabilities. But often we associate confidence was like, well, I've had a few successful surgeries, so therefore I'm confident, right? Oh, I made a mistake, therefore I shouldn't be confident anymore. Like it's too short-sighted, right? You're looking at too small of a sample size versus like you can own your capabilities because of all of the training that you've been doing, not because of how the last surgery went. Like if that was the case, then anybody makes mistakes, they should be doubting themselves. So there's that side of it. And it goes even into like imposter syndrome as well. I know is a common thing, which, my mentor Todd Herman does a really good job of like, you're not an actual imposter. Like the wording itself is like is so, a bit of a misnomer because people aren't actually feel like they're an imposter, right? It's like if you went to the med school, you got the degree, you're not impostering. Like if I pretend to be something I'm not, that's impostering. But like you just feeling a significant level of like, oh, do I belong here? I don't know if I'm capable. But again, I have a lot of self-doubt and confidence things. But again, I would just frame it back to, well, are you owning your capabilities or not? It's like, no, right now I'm not owning my capabilities. Now, again, you're going to be developing your capabilities early on, right? Like it's a learning process, and I'm sure it's probably fairly steep as you're transitioning from residency to running your own practice and whatnot. So, but when the language we use will dictate the mental state a lot. And when you're like, oh, like I have confidence problems, like says who? Well, I'm saying about myself, and that becomes a self-perpetuating identity thing. Well, I don't know if I could deal with this adversity. It's like, no, again, accepting and owning that versus like, oh, well, I'm not owning my capabilities right now. Well, why not? Oh, because I'm worried about this, or I'm new. Well, like, yeah, you shouldn't own your capabilities when you're 1 year out of residency or months out of it versus when you're 10 years out of it. Like, like that guy's got more capabilities. Like, that's just a fact.
And that self-perpetuating nature really speaks to me, and that there's times when I know that it's really easy for you to kind of tell yourself a story about yourself, and then that story to really, really just dominate the way you think and the way you behave. And then you realize one day, like, wait, why am I thinking like that? Like, I used to maybe go into an OR day thinking, oh, I'm nervous. Like, there's a guy next door who's operating, and I mean, they're probably a little bit better than me. And then something clicked. I was like, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm fine. And just changing the story, it didn't actually change anything I was doing, but it just made me feel a little bit more confident, not overconfident. And there's that balance of not wanting to feel overconfident. And you address that kind of balance that you need to strike between humility and overconfidence, somewhere in the middle. But it's really, it's wild how your brain can kind of tell you these stories sometimes, and then you can just get fixated on them for indefinitely. In ophthalmology, one of the unique things is that we operate on a lot of patients. A cataract surgery takes on average about 15 minutes. So a lot of surgeons will do about 20 patients in a day. And a lot of people, like myself included, let's say I do 20 patients in a day and 19 go great and one does not go great. I'll come home and that's a failure for me. And I'm not trying to say that in a pretentious way, like I'm perfect. It just, the reality is in ophthalmology, if you get the PCR that I'm talking about and it goes south, you kind of say to yourself, well, 95%, I should be having a PCR rate of about 1%, not 5%, which is 19 out of 20, which people can do math, obviously. So it's easy, though, to say, well, even though I had a great day, it wasn't a great day because percentage-wise, I shouldn't be doing that. I guess there's two questions here. One, during the day, if it's your fifth case, say, okay, well, I got to move on. I got 15 other patients I got to operate on and be my best self. And then two, at the end of the day, not overly exaggerate that one moment and have it color the whole day.
Yeah, great question. And I love this stuff. I'd argue or propose two very important things that to me are like almost non-negotiable. Like if you want to be a high performer, I would have routines or a preset response for, well, if, or more so when something happens midday, adversity, how am I going to respond? Now, the solution will be a fewfold. One is first knowing, well, what's my tendency to go? Do I shrink? Do I go small? Do I panic and worry? Do I kind of do I beat myself up? So knowing your personalized response, well, now we can create a solution to breathe through, give yourself some space to process that emotion so that you do get centered and back into, like you said, your best self. So we do it with athletes. They have like a reset routine, right? And it uses acceptance, it's ownership, it's using breathing to manage the arousal level, and then recommitting and creating the story and the narrative to move forward. And so, there's a lot that we could unpack, but it's very personalized. And it starts with knowing, okay, well, how do I respond in this moment? Often my tendency. And if I feel this way and I start going into that, well, here's how I'm going to own this, not judge yourself for it too, because that's a common trap. If you start judging yourself for like, oh, I'm getting frustrated or I'm doubting myself. Oh my God, I'm judging and then you're like, oh my, why am I doubting myself? And now like, you're definitely screwed. Like that's a downward versus like have the self-compassion, be like, I'm a human. Of course I'm like upset that didn't work. Of course I might feel a little bit of doubt or worry or feel a bit small. That's okay. And I can own the situation. And now how do I want to move forward? And it's like, all right, well, I can use it to learn and grow. I've got a fresh surgery here. Look at all the other things I've done. Like I own my capabilities versus small. I make myself big, change your posture, your breathing. It's like, all right, let's move forward. The reset's done. I've had like some of the surgeons, doctors I work with, they might have a part of their uniform as like a key part of their we're talking about like alter egos, which is like an identity based thing. So, all right, let's lock it back in now. Like you've done a little reset, lock it back in before the next one. So I would have something like that. And I bet, the surgeons that have been around, there's a lot of them will have something like that. They have a little routine, I'm sure, that they probably almost do between every one, let alone, especially a tough one. On the flip side, at the end of the day, and not letting that eat you up forever, or just ruin the rest of your weekend or day or week or whatever, is making sure you have a decompression. So like we do this without, like, how do we decompress after a game, right? How do we compartmentalize? And that's that phase 3, right? There's phase 1. How do we prepare, set that intentions, know who you want to be, you're creating the identity and the plan, and then we let go and just let it happen, phase 2. And we have to adapt. That's the reset routine and adapt along the way, and you stay in it. Well, after, how do we reflect? How can we learn? How can we process, own it, and then park it? Because like a huge mistake high performers do is they will ruminate about it forever. And we're, as humans, we're predispositioned to focus on like, threat adverse, like, where's did I screw up and make sure so we're designed to focus on the negative way more than the positive, right? So therefore, part of then what you do is like write down your wins. Like I'm a huge advocate of everyone, like write down your 5 wins. Like what went well today? Oh yeah, I remember this. I connected well with that patient. I did a good adaptation here. Like I crushed this one. Like like no matter how tough of a day, write down what went well. If you, especially if you're somebody that finds themselves getting always replaying the negativity, like just build that practice in. Because if we want to be a high performer that thrives, that's helpful. If you're trying to just survive, yeah, don't focus on what's going well. Like you're in survival mode. You're in the woods. Like where's the danger? like I just need to survive. You're not in survival mode. You're in trying to thrive and maximize impact and be a high performer. So to fuel that growth and certainty and confidence, it's like, hey, own your capabilities. Own it every day. Own the wins. Like it creates its own internal momentum. So just that practice will help subset it a bit. And then it's like, all right, well, what can I learn? What could I do differently? And process it and then park it and be like, all right, it's over. Now shift gears, get into family mode, friends mode, like sport mode, whatever you want to do. So, but I would have a process so that it helps eliminate or at least reduce the never ending rumination. Another, yeah, I'll give one other quick analogy to it too. You could maybe use is like, there's the surgeon hat that goes and does the surgery. And then there's like a manager hat that's like manages the surgeon's career, manages their like, and we do this with athletes. It's like, hey, it's managing expectations. And so it's like shifting gears from, in the business world, be like the guy scooping the ice cream that just, is out there, he's delivering. That's the athlete they're just the employee just getting it done. Whereas sometimes they got to put the manager hat on being like, well, should we scoop ice cream here? What's like, do I need to ask for a trade? Managing, how's playing time going to go? So they're managing. That's very different mindset traits like logic, strategic, etc. This guy is like in it, passion in the moment. So you might be wearing a different hat as well than in this mode.
One of the things, especially in sports and I guess in surgery, as I'm thinking, even not necessarily even between cases, but even during a case, in terms of implementing that routine and knowing what it's going to be, sometimes that's got to be done really, really quickly, right? Like I'm thinking if a running back in football fumbles the ball and they've got maybe 5 minutes before they're back on offense, or in surgery, if you have a complication and then you've still got 15 patients to operate on for the rest of the day, that process, it's got to be quick. So is there enough time to have, I guess, depending on who you're dealing with, the process can be a little bit different and, like you said, tailored.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I'll use this. So like in between patients, you might have like 2 to 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes max. So that's more than enough time to do to give yourself the space to do a routine. Like these routines, we generally make them like 15 to 30 seconds, but you can make it longer. Now, in surgery, you're not doing a reset routine. You then want to do coping plan. Like, well, if it's going in that moment, I just take a breath and adapt, right? Like I'm not going to panic and go down this road. I'm going to stay down and stay present. It's okay. Like this is what I signed up for. Like, let's stay in it, right? And keep trusting and adapting along the way versus start hitting the panic button. Does that make sense? Like that was like one of the surgeons I work with, like that was his thing. And he had, it's not that he was doing poor surgery. He was actually, pretty, higher level surgeon, but he was like, but his heart rate would go up. And especially like in his, like, he was getting nervous, right? Like in it. And so it wasn't really hurting his performance, but he's like, I don't feel locked in all the time. Like as locked in as maybe I could. And so as he was able to pre-accept the range of results, he had a plan to cope with, well, if he got the fear of, the intern or the resident not doing as well, or a complication happening, they got to whatever his types of surgeries he was doing, he had a plan to cope with it. Does that so then he was like, well, then when it happened, it's like, he stayed calmer. Right. And so that's less of a reset routine. That's just, well, this is how I plan to cope in that moment. I just take a breath and I just, I embrace it and go with it versus panic and like start judging myself and be, oh my God, this is so bad. It's like, it's just part of the job. So, I remember, I think he used like the gladiator, like it was his alter ego, and he wanted to be very stoic, obviously, and some things like that. So being intentional about who he wanted to be and how he wanted to respond to different moments. So that's kind of that might be more applicable to your audience too, around like, hey, like what are you doing in surgery versus then in between? Like the in between one might be like, oh, I might, take the glasses off or whatever. I, just take a second, I go breathe, do like 5 deep diaphragmatic breaths and process it and let it go. And, you get some time and space to process the emotion and let it go and then move forward and set your intention again. Whereas you don't got time. Like, yeah, so like I got time, the guy but it can happen in a moment. But if you have time and the space, like create the time and space and again, the emotions in our body, if you own them and process them, they'll dissipate. Like it's like I'm sure you know this better than I do. It's the chemical reactions that are happening. Like they won't linger forever if you deal with them. But if you hold on to it, you're like, oh yeah, that was shit. I'm an idiot. I suck. Like now you're going to keep playing the narrative. Like you'll stay tense and worried and fearful more so the rest of the day.
That reset obviously is different. That's kind of in between cases, not during the case. You can reset between the case, and it's reassuring what you're saying that it doesn't need to take like an hour. Ideally, these are designed for situations like this where you might only have a minute or a couple minutes where you can do that reset routine. And then during the case, you're right. It's really easy when you see, and a PCR, what I explained before, is a good example because it can go south really quickly, or it can be fairly a non-issue if you deal with it well. And I think what that comes down to is, one, what you've described is don't get into your head and start saying, I'm a bad surgeon, this is awful, this is going to be a bad day. And the other thing is kind of the pre-planning, acceptance that that's going to happen, and also pre-planning and having the skills to deal with it. And if you're in the right mentality, then you're going to be able to kind of go into your tool bag a little bit more easily and deal with the situation better. How do you prepare for a big moment? I mean, in sports, there are big games. In surgery, every patient matters, of course, and every patient is equal. But some of us live in communities where we're kind of forced to operate on people we know. You try, or some people don't try, but most of us try to not operate on people we know for many reasons. But there's situations where there's going to be a surgical case which is either on somebody that you're nervous about, or the nature of the case is more challenging. Do you have any specific advice on not letting a moment be too big?
Yeah, for sure. So it's, again, you want to personalize it. Well, how, like a common example is then, well, like, how do you feel in that moment? So again, I might feel like, oh, I'm small. The moment's so big. I get fearful. I get like a little timid. I'm like less confident, and you kind of go almost like too cautious. I could see this as a surgeon. It's like if you go too slow, like I don't know. Like, does that make sense?
There's a patient I was operating on yesterday who said before surgery, I just want this to go well, quick, and get a great result fast. This is right before I'm operating. And I noticed as I started operating, my mental process is changing and thinking, and then reflecting afterwards, how did that affect the way I did it, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
it's natural that I realized, you know what, I was taking a little bit more time on a couple steps.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was necessarily a good thing, taking more time.
Yeah.
I think that made me feel like I was giving the extra care because she was making me a little bit stressed out.
Yeah.
But that was deviating from my typical routine.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, and then that's the point. So it's like, oh, I get cautious and I'm going to try and go slower, which is like, no, like what's like, I will butcher trying to explain what you do.
There are certain steps where it's not always better, right? There are certain steps where you need to be decisive, and slowing down takes away from that decisiveness of your movement.
Yeah. Yeah, and then your hand might shake or like what, like, you know what I mean? Like you just like force yourself. So that's all, like we call it forcing and controlling versus letting it happen. And but knowing that feeling, and then you can be intentional to like, okay, normalize it, accept it, embrace it, so that you can now, all right, let that go and go to, well, how do I want it? Like decisive, confident, certain. So knowing that matters, but if you're making it bigger than you and therefore you get small. So it's like, well, I'm going to make myself like, I can deal with this. We use zoom out a lot as well. So it's like, I'm going to make myself big. I'm going to zoom out on the situation, because if you zoom in on it, it feels huge and big. Oh my God, this is so important. It's like, no, it's just another patient. Of course it's different. The context is different. It's like going into the playoffs and sports. It's like, yeah, the context has changed. It seems bigger, but it's still just sport. Makes sense? Like it's still just a game. And the net's the same size, the game's the same. And so being able to zoom out is a helpful way to give perspective, and therefore not zoom in and feel the weight of it. So it's like, okay, well, knowing that shift, I'm going to zoom out, I'm going to stay big and own it. I'm going to be decisive, not be hesitant. Like now you can step into that. So that's one way of a quick way of like knowing that contrast. And again, so then when you get there, it's like, all right, let's step into it. Now, one of the other things I haven't said, or I've said, but I haven't really explained is I love the words letting go. So this really comes from, there's a bunch of different places let go and let it happen comes from. But one of my favorites is Phil Stutz, who's done some great work in the field, and he uses a lot of like tools, analogies to paint a picture. And so the idea of what that looks like is very much you could think of like before a surgery, before a game for an athlete. You're at the top of this mountain. So again, phase one, you want to be really prepared. You're prepared to jump off this mountain and do this cliff dive, which is kind of scary. And you're going to land at the end of the game, at the end of the cliff dive, at the end of the surgery, either a result you like or don't like. There's two ends, right? And there's everywhere in between. And the point being is, well, you're at the top of this cliff. And you're like, okay, well, time to jump off and let it happen and let go. And what happens? We don't let go. We hold on. So you're holding on to the rope. You're like, I'm trying to control myself to perfectly get this result because it matters so much and I want it so much. But then what happens? You're not letting it happen. You're not you're not actually going to perform as well. And so Phil Stutz does a great analogy of like, okay, imagine yourself in the top. There's this range of results. And no matter what, you'll be okay. You can deal with this range. You're holding on the rope, just let go and free fall. Just fall off the cliff. And when you've let go, you're like, all right, let's go, like, let it go. And now let it happen. Now go with the flow. Now, just trust your training and your skills and do the skydiving, whatever, to influence, which is a key word, versus control. It's like influence yourself to get the optimal result. Like let yourself perform in a way. And so, and again, like you can play with the different words. Like we use influence and control. Like some people are like, I want control. I don't want, but it's like, but again, if you're someone that's struggling with like trying to force and control, especially in those moments where you feel there's a lot of pressure, it's like, I like, let me trust myself and let it happen. Let me let go before, because otherwise you were not going to shift from phase one to phase two. And again, remember, key to phase two, you're not thinking, you're just letting it happen. Well, you won't do that if you don't let go. Makes sense? So we do all this prep to prepare ourselves so that we optimize the probability of the result and to show up the way we want. But then we still have to let go. You got to jump off the cliff and like just get into it. Like now you've shifted gears and you're in phase two. So
there's so many different gears that you need to be in at different stages, which you've really explained really well, right? Like some of the advice you're giving is, as we spoke about at the beginning, it's before you're operating, before you're playing a game. And then that is to prepare you to go and dive in the actual game or in the surgery and get out of your head. You got to do work in your head and be in your head at one point, but then you got to get out of your head. And it's changing, but it's also kind of understanding at which point, compartmentalizing when it's valuable to think and when it's valuable to not think, kind of. One question that somebody asked me was about routine, and we've talked a bit about routine, but like, let's say on an operating room day, a lot of people will go in, they'll put their music on, they'll kind of have their routine of scrubbing their hands, or everybody's got their own thing. Maybe they'll say something to themselves, something weird, or who knows. And they said, is it helpful to have that routine? And my first thought was, I would imagine it is helpful to have routine. But they also said, is it maybe unhelpful because if you get into a routine and you keep doing things the same way, you might be missing something. Or by doing the same thing for every case, you might be missing the subtleties and differences between different cases. What are your thoughts on the importance of establishing a routine before a game for a hockey player, for example, or for a surgeon before they're operating?
Yeah, great question. So I'll explain quickly, like routines versus superstitions. So, and you think of like more, when we're thinking mental prep, routines are very helpful, right? When we're thinking of actually tactical prep, right, or technical prep about how you're going to do the surgery and like reviewing the case and visualizing it or whatever, like, I do think there could be some personalized, like, okay, well, I'm doing this type of surgery, or this is the situation, or this is like, I know I'm going to make this, like, I'm sure there's some differences in certain cases that therefore I would probably tactically prepare differently for. But when we're just thinking general routines, like, okay, the timing, the things I say, or how I approach and how I want to look and feel the music, routines are very helpful. The caution is always be careful to start creating superstitions. And it's like, well, because I tie my shoes this way, like I get like, it's like that causes me to do great. Like, oh, like that's not like, but it's easy to like get almost superstition, which then becomes a problem when like, oh, well, I couldn't do the routine the way I wanted to. And then you start spiraling.
I was going to ask what the danger was with superstitions, because so what, somebody has a weird superstition, but if you're saying I got to wear these socks for this, and then you're not wearing the socks one day, then it actually turns into an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's a routine. There is helpful, like, it's like, hey, I'm sure you have like special caps and whatever, right? It's like one day it got missing or it's dirty. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't cause me. It's just part of it's a comfort thing, but I can adapt and do without. Does that make sense? If I have to. So, but having those, it's from a consistency standpoint. I want to show up consistently in a certain state, so I can use certain routines and flows leading up to get me into the arousal state, to get me into the mental state for optimal performance. So, big fan of routines for that. And again, including one of those main routines should be setting the intention, being clear of like, well, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What does that look like? And the coping planning with it too. Well, if this happens, or if I feel that way, how will I respond? Right? You got, you do, 5 minutes of mental prep at the start of your day, and like, it is crazy helpful for consistency. So, and then again, doing a bit of 5-minute decompression reflection at the end of day. That's all we're asking, like, to a degree. It's not a lot of time and energy, but it's a little bit for a consistency in your performance, but also even just your well-being in a way to shut it off away from the field of play.
Cassidy, do you have any final thoughts that you would leave people with just on trying to be high performers?
And one thing we haven't touched on too much is like, staying connected to why you do it is always going to be your greatest source of confidence, focus. And it's like, and even especially in this kind of work, like, I didn't allude to it. I was thinking of it earlier, but like the villain, hero kind of analogy. It's like, in a way, you get to be a hero a lot for a lot of people. Does that make sense? So, but what comes with that, sometimes somebody ain't gonna be happy. So that's just part of the role. Like, and same for pro athletes, right? Like, they get to, sometimes they think they're a hero, but then sometimes they're the villain, and like, you can't get one without the other. And so it's like, and the reality is, you're just going out there and you're doing something that you love to do. And there's a meaningful impact with that, versus again, having that means my life will be great all the time and positive and this will be amazing. Like, no, there's no role in the world that's just sunshine and rainbows all the time. Like, there's challenges that come with that. And so, but knowing why you're doing it, that's what, and is staying connected to that. And that can be part of that mental prep, is like, you don't even need words. It's an experience and a feeling. It's people, it's the patient that said something to you, or it's the end outcome, or it's the experience, or there's a moment early on where like, yeah, this matters to me. And staying connected to that goes a long way to keeping someone grounded and focused and motivated, let alone confident, and knowing having a meaningful experience along the way. So that may be my last kind of like nugget of the day.
Cassidy Preston, thank you so much for joining me. Really, really valuable insight, not just for ophthalmology, but just kind of for life and how to deal with challenges. And like you said, life, I don't know, there's a bit of a misconception, I think, that life is, supposed to be rosy, great all the time. And you're dealing with a lot of people who are in those moments where life is not rosy, and especially with athletes where it's publicly not rosy, and kind of just accepting that, realizing that's what life is, and what are the mental techniques we can use to deal with those tough moments, and then the actual habits we can create. Cassidy, where can people learn more about you and your company?
Yeah, thanks, Al. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. You can find out more about me and my company at cepmindset.com. And we post a little bit on social media at CEP Mindset. And we have a newsletter that you can subscribe, stuff like that. So I'd love to hear from people what they got out of the episode, what their favorite takeaway was. Obviously, I was interested in learning more about our services, or they can find the book on Amazon. Mindset First is an easy, good starting spot as well. And again, thanks for having me. So,
Dr. Cassidy Preston, thank you so much for joining me. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of the podcast. Have a great day.